What would you do if, after being humiliated on a first date in front of a cafe full of strangers, for little kids walked up to you and asked in sign language, "Are you our new mommy?" That single question would shatter everything a deaf woman thought she knew about rejection, love, and what it means to belong. And it would completely rearrange the life of a single father who had convinced himself that keeping his world small was the safest way to protect his children. Today you'll hear the story of Courtney, of Jonathan, and of four 6-year-olds who believed in magic long before any adult dared to believe in second chances. It is a story that begins with a text on a dating app, continues with a cruel message on a phone screen, and is rewritten in the doorway of a cafe where one stumble and one act of kindness opened a door none of them saw coming. Stay until the end, because the real twist isn't just romance. It is the way all of them slowly discover that family isn't something you're simply born into. It's something you build, sign by sign, choice by choice. If deep, emotional stories resonate with you, stories full of human details, quiet courage, and redemption, I invite you to stay with me until the very last moment. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Somewhere inside this story, you might recognize a truth you needed to hear, that your worst day may secretly be the doorway to something you've been waiting for your whole life. Courtney Lane checked her phone for the 43rd time just as she saw a man walk through the cafe door. Relief rushed through her chest like a sudden warm wave. He had actually come. He wasn't another digital ghost who vanished the moment things became complicated. She stood up slightly, smoothing her dress with shaky hands and forcing herself to breathe, trying to look calm even though she had been sitting alone long enough for her coffee to go cold. The man from the dating profile, Marcus, looked exactly like his photos. Tall, clean-cut, crisp button-down shirt. The kind of polished man who seemed to have his life neatly under control. The kind of man who, in theory, didn't run when things got hard. Courtney raised her hand to catch his attention and, almost in the same motion, grabbed her phone. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, crafting a short, clear message to bridge the gap between her lips and his ears. As he approached, she held the phone up so he could read. "Hi, I'm Courtney. It's so nice to finally meet you." At the same time, she spoke out loud, her voice carrying that slightly flat tone of someone who cannot hear herself. "Hi, Marcus." For one brief second, everything seemed normal. He stopped a few feet from her table, eyes flicking between the glowing screen and her hopeful face, as if matching the pieces of a puzzle. Then, something shifted. First came confusion in his expression, then recognition, and finally a look she knew far too well. Discomfort wrapped around a quiet, "No." He didn't sit down. Instead, he took a tiny step backward, so slight most people wouldn't have noticed. Courtney did. She felt the corners of her smile begin to tremble. Marcus pulled out his own phone. His thumbs flew over the glass. A moment later, Courtney's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the message, and the words hit harder than any shout. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were deaf. This isn't going to work for me. I need someone I can communicate with normally. Good luck." When she looked up, he was already retreating, his face tightened with awkwardness and a thin layer of pity. He turned and walked out of the cafe without ever sitting down. Courtney remained standing beside the table, phone still in her hand, the rejection message glowing like a cruel spotlight in a room full of strangers pretending not to stare. Heat rushed to her face. Her chest felt too tight. Once again, the thing she could not change about herself had become too much for someone. This time, the rejection didn't happen quietly behind a screen. It happened in real time, in public, with witnesses who chose to look away. From a table by the window, Jonathan Myers watched the entire scene. At first, he was just a tired dad enjoying a rare hour of quiet. He had been at the cafe for 20 minutes, pretending to read the same paragraph of his novel while nursing a lukewarm coffee. His friend Ryan had canceled on him last minute because of a family emergency, but Jonathan had come anyway. The nanny, Margaret, was already scheduled to take the kids to the park across the street. Through the glass, he could see all four of them. 2 boys with short brown hair, 2 girls with long, bouncing curls, all of them 6 years old and pure electricity, scrambling over playground equipment while Margaret watched with amused patience. Jonathan should have been relaxing, grateful for the silence. Instead, he kept finding his gaze pulled back to the woman sitting near the door, the one checking her phone with growing anxiety, whose hopeful expression slowly hardened into something else. He saw the moment her date finally walked in and felt a flicker of relief for her, as if some small piece of justice had been served. Then he watched her lift her phone to show the screen, saw the way the man's body language shifted, the step back, the tightening jaw, the raised hands of refusal. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The story was written across their faces: hope, realization, retreat, humiliation. Jonathan's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Part of him wanted to get up, chase after the man, and tell him exactly what kind of small, shallow person he'd just proven himself to be. But Jonathan stayed where he was, nailed to his chair by doubt. Who was he to get involved? He was a stranger. What if approaching her only made everything worse, made her feel even more exposed? So he stayed seated and quietly despised himself for it. The woman collapsed back into her chair. Her shoulders trembled with silent sobs she was clearly fighting to hide. Her hands covered her face for a moment, then dropped to the table, fingers pressed flat, as if she needed the contact with something solid to keep from falling apart. After a few seconds that felt much longer, she abruptly pushed herself to her feet. The chair scraped against the floor with a sharp sound that did what her heartbreak hadn't done, made people look up. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with the effort not to completely lose control, and rushed toward the door. She moved too fast, too blinded by shame to see the small raised threshold at the entrance. Her toe caught on it. For Courtney, the world tipped forward. She threw her hands out, trying to catch herself, but momentum carried her straight into the door frame. Her shoulder hit with a dull thud. Her purse flew from her grip, spilling its contents everywhere, lipstick tubes skittering across the floor, coins rolling in different directions, keys clattering, her phone sliding away. It was as if the universe had decided to underline her humiliation in bold. By the time she realized she was on the floor, someone was already there with her. Jonathan had moved before he thought. He crossed the cafe in a few quick strides and dropped to his knees beside her. His hands moved fast and sure, collecting scattered items into a neat little pile in front of her. "I've got it," he said gently, not even sure how much she could hear. "Are you okay?" Courtney's face burned with embarrassment. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her things with trembling fingers. She looked up at him and focused on his lips, trying to catch the shape of his words. She saw his concern, heard only a faint echo in her mind. Then she did the familiar, painful gesture she had made so many times before. She pointed to her ear and shook her head. She pulled out her phone, typed quickly, and held the screen toward him. "Thank you. I'm deaf. I'm sorry for the trouble." Jonathan's expression softened instantly. The strain in his features melted into something warm and understanding. Still holding her purse and the items he had gathered, he lifted his free hand and began to sign. "Don't apologize. Are you okay?" The effect on Courtney was like a shock. Her eyes flew wide. Her mouth dropped open in surprise. Her own hands moved almost automatically. "You know sign language?" He nodded, his fingers forming the shapes with familiar ease. "My son is deaf. We all use ASL at home." He extended his free hand to her while signing and speaking at the same time. "I'm Jonathan." Courtney took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, still staring at his hands as if he'd just performed a magic trick. "I'm Courtney," she signed, her movements fast and a little shaky. "I can't believe you know sign language. This never happens." "I saw what happened," Jonathan signed, sympathy written all over his face. "I'm sorry. That guy is an idiot." A laugh burst out of Courtney, half sob, half genuine amusement. She signed back, "Thank you. That is exactly what he is." Then her hands slowed, uncertain. "I'm sorry you had to witness that disaster." "Stop apologizing," Jonathan insisted, his signs firm but kind. "You did nothing wrong." For a moment, they stood there in the doorway, two strangers having an entire conversation in silence while the cafe buzzed and clattered around them. For the first time since she had arrived, Courtney's face showed something other than hurt. A small, cautious smile appeared, but it was real. Jonathan was about to say something else, maybe offer to buy her a fresh coffee, maybe simply wish her a better day, when the cafe door suddenly flew open. "Daddy!" For voices, well, 3 actual voices and one equally loud burst of energy, hit the air at once. 4 6-year-olds barreled into the cafe like a tiny, chaotic storm. "Daddy, you have to come see." Aurelia started, her long curls bouncing. "There's a dog at the park that knows tricks," Orion continued, his short hair sticking up in every direction. "And he can dance," Leora added, her own curls swaying as she ran. All three speaking children froze mid-sentence when they processed what they were seeing. Their father was standing very close to a strange woman, holding her purse, clearly in the middle of some important moment. The fourth child, Atlas, the quiet one, was the first to notice Jonathan's hands. His sharp gaze locked onto the exact shape of his father's fingers. He recognized the posture instantly. His dad was signing. The woman was signing. Excitement lit up Atlas's face like a sunrise. He tugged on his siblings and began to sign rapidly. "Dad is signing with her. She knows our language." Orion's mouth fell open. Leora gasped. Aurelia's entire face transformed into pure, unfiltered hope. "No." Jonathan signed immediately, seeing exactly where this was going. His movements were quick and urgent. "Whatever you're thinking." But children who have spent their entire conscious lives silently wishing for something impossible do not stop because an adult tells them to. They looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. Then, as one unit, they stepped forward, their small hands lifted into the air. Three voices spoke in unison while four pairs of hands spelled out the same words in ASL: visible, unmistakable, impossible to misread. "Are you our new mommy?" The question hung in the air and in their hands like a bell that had just been struck. Courtney saw every movement, every sign. Her breath caught loudly in her throat. Her eyes jumped from the children to Jonathan, then back to the children, her own hands frozen halfway to her chest. Jonathan's face turned crimson. Behind the kids, Margaret made a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Kids," Jonathan signed sharply, mortification burning in every gesture. "This is Courtney. She's someone I just met. She had a bad day, and I was helping her." He turned back to Courtney and signed an apology so fast it was almost a blur. "I am so sorry. They don't usually." But Courtney wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the four children lined up in front of her like a tiny jury, their faces full of raw hope. Tears were gathering in her eyes again, but this time they felt different. Not the heavy, poisonous tears of rejection, but something gentler, deeper. Atlas stepped forward. He was slightly smaller than his siblings, his movements more careful, deliberate. His hands formed precise signs. "You're deaf like me." Courtney dropped to her knees so they were at eye level. She signed back. "Yes, just like you." "Do people think you're weird?" Atlas asked, his young face serious. "Sometimes," Courtney answered honestly with her hands. "Us too," Atlas signed. "Because we all sign at home." Kids at school laugh. Courtney's face crumpled and rebuilt itself in a single heartbeat. She turned her signs to all four children. "Then those kids don't understand that you're special. You're amazing. You're perfect." Aurelia jumped in, signing and speaking at once, her enthusiasm barely contained. "You know our special language. Everyone at school says we're weird because we sign at home. You wouldn't think we're weird. And you're pretty," Orion added, doubling down with practical 6-year-old logic, signing clumsily as he spoke. Leora, the gentlest of the four, simply signed, "We've been looking for someone like you." Atlas's hands moved again, more slowly this time. "We've been waiting for someone like you." A startled laugh burst from Courtney, half sobbing, half disbelieving joy. Her hands shook as she signed, glancing up at Jonathan. "I've known your father for 60 seconds. Jonathan wanted the floor to swallow him whole. His kids had essentially proposed to a stranger on his behalf, in public, 10 minutes after she'd been brutally rejected. And yet, as he watched Courtney laugh, really laugh, surrounded by his children, something warm and dangerous began to uncoil in his chest. 20 minutes later, what had started as a disaster was beginning to look like the beginning of something else entirely. Jonathan had asked Margaret, somewhat sheepishly, if she could stay a bit longer. She had simply smiled, as if none of this surprised her, and nodded. They had moved from the doorway to a larger table in the middle of the café, cluttered now with cups, napkins, and kids' drawings. The quadruplets were not shy. Rather than being intimidated by this new adult, they had collectively decided to adopt her. One by one, they introduced themselves with the kind of elaborate detail only a 6-year-old finds absolutely necessary. "I'm Aurelia Celeste Myers. Aurelia signed carefully. I'm 6 3/4. I like pink and purple and horses, even though I've never ridden one. I want to be a veterinarian when I grow up. Or a princess. Maybe both. Orion went next. I'm Orion James Myers. I'm 6 3/4 too because we're quadruplets, which means we all came out on the same day. He grinned, signing with broad, confident movements. I like dinosaurs and space and making people laugh. I can burp the alphabet. He began to demonstrate until Jonathan gave him a sharp look and he abruptly cut off at G. Leora followed, her sign small and precise. I'm Leora Myers. I like reading and drawing and flowers. I'm glad you came. Finally, Atlas signed, slower but deeply focused. I'm Atlas River. I'm the only one who can't hear, but everyone learns sign language for me. I like science and building things and swimming. Courtney looked at each child like they were the most extraordinary creatures she had ever seen. Those are beautiful names, she sighed. Do you know what they mean? Her heads shook in unison. Her hands moved again, gentle and animated. Atlas was a titan who held up the sky. Orion is a constellation, a group of stars. Leora means light in Hebrew, and Aurelia means golden in Latin. She lifted her eyes to Jonathan and smiled. Someone chose very meaningful names. Jonathan felt his face heat. My ex-wife chose them. He signed, and immediately wished he had kept that part to himself. She was very into mythology and stars. If the children noticed the mention of their mother, they didn't show it. They were too busy soaking up Courtney's presence. Soon, a game emerged, silent charades. The rules were perfect for them. No speaking and no signing. Everything had to be acted out. Leora tried to act out astronaut riding a dinosaur, which mostly looked like exaggerated stomping combined with pretend floating. Orion attempted pizza making itself, ending in a dramatic flop to the floor as though he'd been tossed by an invisible chef. Atlas performed an impression of their teacher, Mrs. Maria, so eerily accurate that Courtney started laughing until she snorted. She slapped a hand over her mouth, mortified, which only made the kids laugh harder. Your turn, Aurelia signed to Courtney. Courtney thought for a moment, then flapped her arms wildly and pretended to blow out candles. Birthday, Atlas signed triumphantly. Yes, Aurelia added, excited. Our birthday was last month. All 4 of us turned 6 on the same day because we're quadruplets. We had 4 cakes, Orion claimed. That's not true, Leora corrected, hiding a smile. We had 1 big cake. It was big enough to be 4 cakes, Orion insisted. Aurelia turned back to Courtney, curiosity glowing in her eyes. When's your birthday? Courtney signed casually, not expecting anything. Actually, it's tomorrow. All 4 children froze mid-motion, eyes going comically wide. Tomorrow, they signed and said in near-perfect unison. Like actual tomorrow? October 15th, tomorrow. Courtney laughed at their theatrical shock. Yes, actual tomorrow. The children huddled up immediately, forming a tight circle. Their hands flew in a blur of rapid signing that Courtney couldn't possibly follow. Jonathan attempted to step in. Hey, what are you for planning? They waved him away with the universal gesture for grown-ups not invited. After a brief storm of discussion, they turned back to Courtney. Leora, apparently elected spokesperson, signed carefully. Do you have special plans? Like a big party with friends. Courtney's smile flickered, just a tiny crack, but Jonathan caught it. Oh, probably just a quiet day, she sighed. Maybe I'll treat myself to something nice. Atlas tilted his head, eyes narrowing with serious curiosity. Will you celebrate with friends? He asked. Courtney hesitated. Her hands moved slowly. It'll just be me. But that's okay. I'm used to quiet birthdays. The 4 children exchanged a look, that secret sibling communication that always meant something big was coming. Either something wonderful or something that would give their father a mild heart attack. That's not okay. Atlas signed with solemn intensity. Nobody should celebrate their birthday alone. We should have a party, Aurelia added, bursting with enthusiasm. Here, tomorrow. Courtney looked genuinely touched, but uncertain. You want to throw me a birthday party? You just met me. So. Orion signed with flawless 6-year-old logic. We like you. That's enough. Please, Leora added. Her expression so earnest it seemed capable of bending steel. Courtney turned to Jonathan, her eyes asking what her hands didn't. Is this for real? Is this safe to want? Or is this just one more promise that will quietly vanish? Jonathan signed back with a gentle smile. Only if you want to. No pressure. But I should warn you. Once they decide on a party, there's no stopping them. Watching her, he saw something familiar. That fragile moment when a person realizes they might not have to be alone anymore. When someone is actually choosing them, without flinching, without conditions. I'd love that. Courtney signed at last. Really? That evening, after the kids had finally been wrangled into bed, a process extended by at least 45 minutes thanks to their constant reappearing with urgent questions about the party, Jonathan collapsed onto his worn leather couch. He held a beer he had no real intention of drinking. His mind kept replaying the scenes from the café. The hollow look on Courtney's face when that man walked out, the light that appeared when she realized someone spoke her language, the way his children had gravitated toward her like she was something they'd been missing. Slowly, his thoughts drifted backward, pulled to a very different season of his life. 7 years ago, he'd been 28 and convinced he understood how his future would unfold. He was married to his college sweetheart, Amy Rowland, beautiful, ambitious, a woman who had grown up dreaming of Broadway stages and movie sets. She had taken a backstage job at a local theater when they married, promising herself she'd chase the spotlight later. When they found out she was pregnant, both of them were overjoyed. When the ultrasound revealed not one, not two, but 4 healthy babies, joy twisted into awe and fear. Quadruplets, the doctor had said carefully. The odds are approximately 1 in 729,000 pregnancies. Amy had squeezed Jonathan's hand so hard she nearly left marks. 4, she whispered. We're having 4 babies. They laughed and cried together in that sterile room, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what awaited them. Atlas, Orion, Leora, and Aurelia arrived on a cold September morning via emergency C-section. Jonathan held each tiny newborn in his arms, impossibly small and impossibly perfect, and felt a fierce love surge through him that rewrote every single priority he'd ever had. The first 2 years were chaos stitched together with caffeine and stubborn determination. His parents helped, taking shifts so he and Amy could grab brief stretches of sleep. The babies hit their milestones, each one developing a distinct personality. On the surface, things looked okay, but Jonathan could see the restlessness growing in Amy. Every time she stood backstage while a show ran, every time she watched actors take their bows to thunderous applause, something flickered in her eyes. Longing, regret, a quiet grief for the life she had imagined and put on hold. When the quadruplets turned 2, everything cracked. One night, after an exhausting bedtime routine involving multiple stories, negotiations, and last-minute diaper disasters, Amy sat down across from him with a brightness in her face he hadn't seen in months. I got a call today, she said, voice trembling with excitement. From Marcus Levy, the casting director. He wants me to audition for a recurring role in a new streaming series. They're filming in California. John, this is my shot. My real one. Jonathan's first reaction was pride. That's amazing, he said. We can figure something out. Maybe we. I'm going alone, she cut in, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped inside her for too long. I can't do this with 4 toddlers, John. I can't. They're wonderful and beautiful, but this isn't what I planned. I wanted 1 kid. Maybe 2. Not 4 at once who need everything, all the time. He felt the ground drop out from under him. There are children, he said softly. I can't be the mother they need and the actress I want to be, she answered, her voice breaking but her eyes firm. I have to choose. And I'm choosing me. The divorce was efficient and oddly emotionless. Amy signed over full custody without hesitation. She promised she would call regularly, stay involved, be a mother from a distance. For a while, she kept her word. Weekly video calls where 4 toddlers pressed their faces to the screen, shouting Mama, Mama, while Amy talked about auditions under California's sunshine. Then the calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then just on birthdays and holidays. And then, almost never. Jonathan had removed the framed photo of her from the mantel after an evening when 4-year-old Leora had stood in front of it for 20 minutes, quietly tracing Amy's face with one small finger before asking, why doesn't Mama love us? He hadn't had an answer then. He still didn't. Wanting something doesn't disappear simply because it's absent. Jonathan saw that in all the small, painful details. The way Leora watched other mothers at the park, The silent tears Aurelia cried after school events where every other child seemed to have two parents in the audience. The cruel sing-song of other kids asking, "Where's your mommy?" as if it were a game. And then, when Atlas was 3, came the accident that altered everything again. Jonathan was working from home, in his small office, when he heard a crash so loud it made every nerve in his body go cold. He ran into the living room to find the heavy oak bookshelf toppled onto the floor. Atlas lay beside it, stunned, a large hardcover encyclopedia lying near his head. The hospital stay was a blur of tests, machines, doctors speaking in low, careful tones. Jonathan spent long nights at his son's bedside, holding his tiny hand and sending wordless prayers to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. Atlas survived, but his hearing did not. The damage is permanent, the doctor explained gently. Atlas will not regain his hearing. We can explore cochlear implants later, but there's no guarantee, and they're not suitable for everyone. Jonathan held his once chattering, singing little boy and watched him retreat into a silent world. Atlas went from outgoing to withdrawn, trapped by the frustration of not being able to communicate. His siblings didn't understand why their brother no longer answered when they called, why he lashed out when they tried to play the way they always had. One night, Jonathan made a decision. If his son was going to live in silence, he would step into that world with him. He threw himself into learning American Sign Language. He watched tutorials late into the night, practiced until his hands ached, attended classes for parents of deaf children. He taught Orion, Leora, and Aurelia through games and songs and endless repetition. By the time Atlas turned 4, the entire household was using ASL at home. It became their shared language, their private code. They spoke aloud at school, with teachers and classmates, but at home their hands did the talking, about homework, imaginary adventures, fears, and plans. Atlas was no longer alone. His family had joined him where he was. But the choice came with a cost. Jonathan's world narrowed. Dating became complicated at best, impossible at worst. How do you tell someone that, to really be part of your life, they would need to learn an entirely new language just to sit through dinner? That any relationship would be a package deal with 4 kids, one of them deaf, and a history of abandonment? He had tried once, about a year ago. A woman from work had asked him out. She was funny, kind, easy to talk to. Over dinner, he explained about the kids, about Atlas, about ASL. He watched the light in her eyes dim as she processed the reality. "That's a lot," she said politely. "I don't think I'm ready for that level of complexity." Jonathan hadn't tried again. Not until today, though he hadn't planned it this way. Not until a deaf woman stumbled in the doorway of a café and his carefully controlled, small world tilted sideways. His phone buzzed against his leg, dragging him back to the present. Courtney's name glowed on the screen. "Just wanted to say thank you again for today. Your children are wonderful. I can't remember the last time I felt so included. See you tomorrow." Jonathan smiled despite himself. His thumbs moved over the keyboard. "They are wonderful, aren't they? Even when they mortify me in public. Tomorrow at noon, I'll bring the chaos. You just bring yourself." Her reply came quickly. "I can't wait. Good night, Jonathan." He set the phone down and allowed himself a small, cautious moment of hope. Just enough to imagine that maybe, finally, the universe was offering him something good. The next morning was controlled chaos at its finest. The quadruplets were up at 6, practically vibrating with excitement. They cut construction paper into uneven strips, made colorful chains, argued about exactly how many balloons qualified as a real party, and created banners that leaned, tilted, and shouted "Happy Birthday, Courtney," in wobbly letters. Jonathan quickly realized his idea of a few decorations did not match theirs. He called Sarah, the cafe owner, who had watched his kids grow up one Saturday at a time. "I was wondering if I could reserve the back corner for a few hours," he asked. "It's for the woman from yesterday, the one my kids more or less adopted. For the woman they decided is their new mom." Sarah teased warmly. "Bring your decorations at 10. I'll make sure the corner's ready." She paused, then added, "She seemed lovely. Your kids have good instincts." By 11:30, the cafe looked like a birthday exploded in the back corner. Handmade banners hung from every possible surface. Balloons, far more than Jonathan had intended to buy, bobbed from chairs and table legs. Margaret had somehow secured a chocolate cake on short notice, because the kids had been unanimous on that detail. Chocolate with chocolate frosting, No discussion needed. Atlas held a sign he'd carefully lettered himself, with the words, "Welcome, Courtney," and the finger-spelled version underneath. Jonathan looked at his 4 children, all dressed in matching white outfits they insisted on wearing because it's a special day, and felt his heart twist. "Remember," he signed, gathering all 4 sets of eyes. "Today is Courtney's day. We're celebrating her. Let her talk. Let her enjoy herself. Don't overwhelm her." For solemn nods answered him. He didn't believe them for a second. At exactly noon, the cafe door opened. Courtney stepped inside, and for a moment Jonathan forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her long hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But what struck him most was her expression, nervous, hopeful, full of the particular disbelief of someone who isn't used to being chosen, let alone celebrated. Surprise! All 4 children signed together, faces glowing. Courtney's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes swept over the handmade decorations, the balloons, the cake, the 4 eager little faces waiting hungrily for her reaction. Tears spilled over almost instantly, but her smile grew wide and bright. "You did all this for me," she sighed. "Of course." Aurelia signed with pure conviction. "It's your birthday." "Happy birthday, Courtney." Jonathan signed, his expression warm and steady. Courtney looked at him, and something passed between them. Gratitude, connection, the faint outline of a future neither of them dared name yet. "Thank you," she signed. "All of you. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me." What followed was one of the most chaotic, joyful birthday parties Jonathan had ever seen. The kids insisted Courtney sit at the head of the table, in a seat they had decorated with extra balloons and a paper crown Leora had crafted with serious dedication. "You have to wear it," Leora signed solemnly. "All birthday people wear crowns." Courtney placed the slightly crooked crown on her head as if it were a royal tiara, which sent the kids into fits of giggles. Orion presented his gift first, a drawing of Courtney with 4 stick-figure children surrounding her, all holding hands. "That's us," he signed proudly. "And that's you. We're all holding hands because we're friends now." Courtney's bottom lip trembled. "It's beautiful," she signed. "Thank you, Orion." Leora's gift was a bracelet made of brightly colored beads. "These are happy colors," she signed as she slipped it onto Courtney's wrist. "So you'll always remember happy days." Aurelia had written a poem, what a 6-year-old considers a poem, rhyming Courtney with journey and day with stay. She read it and signed it with such dramatic flair that Courtney had to wipe her eyes. Atlas approached last, holding a small wooden box he had decorated himself. Inside was a smooth stone painted blue. "It's a worry stone," he signed carefully. "My teacher told us about them. When you're sad or worried, you hold it, and it helps. I painted it blue because blue is calm. Yesterday you looked sad. I don't want you to be sad anymore." This time, Courtney couldn't hold herself together. She pulled Atlas into a tight hug, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Atlas hugged her back with small, steady arms. When she let go, she opened her arms to the other 3, and they all piled in. Jonathan watched as this woman who had been abandoned in front of strangers less than 24 hours earlier was now surrounded by 4 children who had decided she belonged with them. Later came the cake, chocolate, with chocolate frosting. Sarah had added candles. "Make a wish," the kids signed excitedly. Courtney closed her eyes, drew in a breath, and blew out the candles. When she opened her eyes, she was still crying, but her face glowed. "What did you wish for?" Orion signed. "If I tell you, it won't come true," she signed back. "But you can give us a hint," Aurelia pressed. Courtney looked at their eager faces, then at Jonathan at the end of the table. "I wished," she signed slowly, "that I'd never feel alone again." "You won't," Leora signed immediately, with the rock-solid certainty only a child can carry. "You have us now." As the party wound down, Margaret took the kids outside for a game of silent tag, leaving the back corner of the cafe strangely quiet. Empty plates and crumpled wrapping paper littered the table, the debris of recent joy. Jonathan and Courtney sat alone for the first time, the noise of the cafe a distant hum. "Thank you," Courtney signed, her movements slower now from emotional exhaustion. "This has been the best birthday I've ever had." The kids were excited. Jonathan signed back with a soft smile. "They've been planning since yesterday. Once they get an idea in their heads." "They're wonderful," Courtney signed. All of them. She paused, watching through the window as the children chased each other outside. Her hands moved more carefully now. Their mother. Jonathan's expression shifted, not into anger or fresh pain, but into a tired acceptance that clearly had roots years deep. She left when they were 2. He sighed. Got a big acting opportunity in California and decided she couldn't be a mother and chase her dreams at the same time. His signs were matter of fact, like a story he'd told himself enough times to file off most of the sharp edges. They hardly remember her now. She calls maybe twice a year. I'm sorry, Courtney signed, and she meant it. We manage, Jonathan replied. But yesterday, when they asked if you were their new mom, that's been their wish for a long time, especially when they see other kids with both parents. That must be hard on them. Courtney signed quietly. It is, Jonathan admitted. Then he looked at her curiously. What about you? How long have you been deaf? Courtney's hands rested in her lap for a moment before she began. 7 years. I was 23. Car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Her signs grew slower, heavier. The doctors kept using words like lucky because I survived, as if losing an entire sense were a minor side effect. She told him about her friends. They didn't know what to do with me afterward. It's not their fault. They tried. But conversations became work. Group hangouts were impossible. Eventually, they stopped trying. It was easier for them that way. Her family, she signed, still loved her, but holidays were exhausting. I spend most of the time smiling and nodding, pretending I understand what's going on. It's like watching life through glass. That sounds incredibly lonely, Jonathan sighed. It is, Courtney answered simply. I've been alone for a long time. Not anymore, Jonathan sighed. At least not if my kids have anything to say about it. Fair warning. They've probably already planned your next 10 birthdays. Courtney laughed, tension breaking like a thin sheet of glass. I wouldn't mind that, she signed. Good, Jonathan answered. Because when they decide they like someone, they're relentless. Through the window, Atlas was demonstrating some complicated sign language game to his siblings. Courtney watched him, her gaze soft. Atlas is lucky, she sighed. He has a family that learned his language. Most deaf kids don't get that. He's my son. Jonathan sighed, almost confused at the idea of doing anything else. Of course we learned. Not everyone would. Courtney sighed, meeting his eyes with quiet certainty. Trust me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the kids run and laugh outside. Between them, something settled into place. Not a promise yet, but the beginning of one. From there, Courtney's presence in their lives grew slowly and steadily, like something that had been meant to happen all along. At first, it was just dinners now and then. She'd show up with a salad or dessert, and the kids would erupt into chaotic excitement. Aurelia claimed her hair as her personal project, weaving braids while chatting. Orion delivered full reenactments of his school day, complete with sound effects and exaggerated facial expressions. Leora would quietly do homework beside her, glancing up to sign questions. Atlas often sat closest of all, comfortable in the shared silence they both understood so well. Soon, now and then, turned into a rhythm. Twice a week, then more. No one could pinpoint the exact moment when Courtney stopped being a guest and became part of the routine. She was there at school events, sitting next to Jonathan in crowded auditoriums. She was there at the zoo when Aurelia scraped her knee and instinctively reached for her instead of anyone else. She was there in the kitchen on tired evenings, sleeves rolled up, helping with dinner while the kids signed over each other to tell her things. One Thursday night, about 6 weeks after the birthday party, Courtney was helping with bedtime. Orion and Leora were in one bunk, Aurelia and Atlas in another. Jonathan was sitting at the edge of Orion's bed, holding a book, silently watching the chaos unfold. Can I ask you something? Aurelia signed, her expression unusually serious. Of course, Courtney replied, sitting down on the edge of her bed. Why don't you have a family? Aurelia signed bluntly. Jonathan's whole body tensed, but he didn't interrupt. I did, Courtney signed slowly. I had my parents, my sister. But after the accident, when I lost my hearing, things got hard. Not because they didn't love me, they did. They just didn't know how to talk to me anymore. It made everyone frustrated and sad. That's stupid, Aurelia signed with childlike honesty. You're easy to talk to. Courtney smiled, her chest tight. Thank you. But it wasn't anybody's fault. Sometimes people don't know how to change when everything suddenly changes around them. Did it make you sad? Leora signed quietly from her bed. Very sad, Courtney answered. Are you still sad? Atlas signed. Courtney looked around the room, the four faces watching her so closely. Jonathan leaning against the doorframe with the book forgotten in his hands. This messy, signing, beautiful little world that had somehow grown around her. Not anymore, she signed honestly. Not since I met you. Atlas nodded, as if that were the answer he'd been waiting for. Good, he signed. Because you're part of our family now. I am. She signed, the words trembling in her hands. Her foreheads nodded in perfect unison. You speak our language, Aurelia signed. That makes you family. Somewhere along the way, the line between friendship and something more blurred, and then quietly disappeared. There was a late-night conversation in the kitchen, when the kids were finally asleep and the house was lit only by the warm glow over the stove. They signed stories about their childhoods, their fears, the paths that had dragged them through heartbreak and brought them, and probably, to that same café. There was a Saturday at the zoo when Orion fell and skinned his knee. Before anyone else could move, Courtney scooped him up, kissed his damp cheek, and signed, "You're so brave," until his sobs turned to hiccups. There was the school performance where all four kids signed a song on stage, and she sat shoulder to shoulder with Jonathan in the audience, both of them crying openly. There was an ordinary Tuesday when Jonathan came home from work exhausted and found Courtney already there, helping with homework, stirring something on the stove, giving him one look that said, "I've got them. Go breathe." The moment he realized he was in love didn't come with fireworks. It came on another ordinary day. Courtney sat at the kitchen table with Leora, explaining a math worksheet in patient, flowing signs. Atlas was nearby building a tower of blocks. Aurelia and Orion were arguing about whose turn it was to feed the goldfish. Courtney's hair had escaped its ponytail. There was a dusting of flour on her cheek from a failed cookie experiment. She was signing with one hand, pointing out numbers with the other, completely at ease in the chaos. Jonathan looked at her and thought, with sudden clarity, I want this for the rest of my life. That night, after the kids were asleep, he asked her to stay a little longer. I need to tell you something. He signed, his heart pounding. Okay. She signed back, nervousness flickering in her eyes. I'm in love with you. Jonathan signed. Courtney's hands froze midair. Her eyes widened. He rushed on. I needed you to know. Not because you're convenient or because you're amazing with the kids, although you are. I love you because you're kind and patient and brave. Because you make me laugh. Because you see my children as blessings, not burdens. Because when I picture the future, you're in it. Jonathan, she began, her hands shaking. You don't have to say anything, he signed quickly. I just needed to tell you. Jonathan, she repeated, more firmly now. Stop signing for a second and look at me. He did. She stepped closer and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, and absolutely right. Her hands came up to cradle his face. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Courtney signed with a trembly smile. I love you too. I've loved you since that ridiculous birthday party when your kids looked at me like I was magic. I was just scared to believe it was real. It's real, Jonathan signed, resting his forehead against hers. Then yes, she signed, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes to whatever this becomes. 12 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, Jonathan stood in the same café where everything had begun, more nervous than he had been in years. He had asked the kids to help him plan his proposal, which in hindsight might have been a tactical mistake because none of them could keep a secret. Courtney thought it was just a casual coffee date. She arrived in jeans and a sweater, her hair in a loose bun, completely unaware. They were sitting at the familiar table near the door when the café door burst open. All four children tumbled in, wearing matching t-shirts that said, yes, in big letters, with the ASL fingerspelled version printed underneath. Courtney's mouth fell open. What? Jonathan stood up, his heart hammering. The kids formed a semicircle around her chair, practically vibrating. Courtney, he signed, his hands shaking slightly. You came into our lives when we needed magic the most. You taught my children that being different is beautiful. You taught me that I could love again, that I didn't have to do this alone. By the time he finished, Courtney was already nodding, tears streaming down her face, her hands rising to sign. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. The café erupted in applause. The kids screamed, 3 of them out loud. Atlas by bouncing so hard, he could feel the floor vibrate. Jonathan slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. I love you, she signed against his chest. I love you too, he signed back. Thank you for tripping in that doorway. She laughed through her tears. Thank you for helping me pick up my things. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Courtney Lane became Courtney Myers in a ceremony conducted entirely in sign language, with an interpreter for the hearing guests. The small venue was filled with friends and family. All 4 children were part of the wedding party. Atlas as ring bearer, carrying the rings with solemn importance. Aurelia and Leora scattering petals in uneven handfuls, and Orion serving as mood manager, which mostly meant signing jokes at inappropriate moments. When it was time for vows, Jonathan signed, pausing often to steady his breath. You taught me that broken things can become beautiful. That families aren't just born, they're built. That love speaks every language, especially the quiet ones. Courtney wiped tears from her cheeks and signed. You showed me I wasn't broken. I was just waiting. That 4 kids asking, are you our new mommy? Wasn't crazy, it was destiny. That home isn't a place. It's you. It's them. It's us. At the reception, Atlas stood up to give a speech in sign language that had everyone in tears again. His small hands moved with deliberate care. Before Courtney, I felt different, like something was wrong with me. But Courtney is like me, and she's not wrong. She's perfect. She taught me that being deaf doesn't mean being less. It means being me. And being me is okay now because I have a family who loves me exactly how I am. Thank you for being our mom. We've been waiting for you our whole lives. Courtney hugged him so hard he squeaked, then opened her arms for the other 3. One by one, they piled in. Jonathan stepped forward, wrapping his arms around all 5 of them. On the dance floor, with music some of them could hear and all of them could feel, they stood in a circle of arms and warmth. In that moment, nothing was missing. From that day on, every small gesture, a hand lifted to translate, a child teaching someone a new sign, a father choosing to stay even when it was hard, became another brick in something bigger, a home. Courtney was no longer the deaf woman who got stood up at a cafe. She became the center of a family that had been searching for her long before any of them had words or signs for it. Jonathan was no longer the dad doing everything alone. He became a man who had dared to open his heart again and discovered that it could hold far more love than he'd ever imagined. For children who once felt weird for signing at home learned that their way of communicating wasn't a defect, it was a gift. They realized that the magic they'd always believed in wasn't a fairy tale. It was the way their dad smiled differently with Courtney in the room. It was having someone who signed just like them. It was knowing that no one would ever again ask where their mom was without being met with an answer full of pride. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Let it remind you that kindness still matters, that compassion still changes lives, and that hope is never wasted, even when it arrives late, even when it shows up in the form of a stranger in a cafe. Support stories like this by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who's walking through a season of loneliness or rejection, share this story with them. Maybe, just like Courtney and Jonathan, all they need is one extended hand to realize they were never as alone as they thought.